today's fourth keynote speaker of the day, Professor Debdoot has not arrived yet. As soon as he arrives, we'll commence the session. Good morning, everyone. The fourth keynote speech of ICIIS 2021 will be done by Professor Debdoot. He is an assistant professor of electrical engineering and artificial intelligence at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. He received his PhD with highest distinction from contributions to computational medical imaging and machine learning from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, India in 2014. His research interests include machine learning, deep learning, and computer platform optimization, medical imaging physics, image and multidimensional signal processing, and visualization. He has co-invented related inventions field and granted as international patents and co-authored articles published at the top-of-the-line journals, conferences, books, and chapters. He's a senior member of IEEE since 2019, has received the IEM Distinguished Young Alumni Award 2016, the GE Edison Challenge 2013, the Fraunhofer Application Award at the Indo-German Grand Science Slam 2012, IEEE Computer Society Richard E. Merwin Student Scholarship 2012, DAAD Sandwich Model PhD Fellowship 2011. He also serves as editor of IEEE Pulse. Sir, the stage is yours.
Thank you. So I just need a confirmation that my screen is up and you are able to hear me perfect.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, great. So thanks for inviting me over here. The relationship with ICIIS has been for long. I've been associated with since 2014, most likely. Yeah. And since then, it has been going on, at least like in the pre-COVID era, when we were not restricted with travels, I would have come down over there most of the time to attend it in person. So this year, however, it's happening virtually, but I'm really delighted to be given this honorable podium where I can deliver a keynote on exactly what we do in our research. Now, what I'm going to say today is about a certain delivery which we attempted during the time of COVID, looking at one of those unmet needs. And that's not necessarily to say that what we did deliver over here is something which I do daily in and out on my research. So it has a certain set of relationship with the research, but a more of part of it was essentially attempting that we see a tangible translation of research outcomes into practical use. Now, when we started with all of these things around COVID across the world, one of the major challenges which struck us was that we did not know exactly how do you diagnose this particular disease. It was a disease of a new kind. The only known other options was that it definitely emerged as a severe acute respiratory disorder, so respiratory syndrome. So it was of the SARS family, and it was a coronavirus. That is at least what nuclear magnetic resonance and PCR studies did yield about the structure of the virus which was causing it. The thing what was not known is that that's something which you know from a developmental biology perspective. And what is not known is from a clinical understanding, how will you really diagnose, how will you find out a cure for it, and how will you monitor people who are under an intervention, which is when they are given cure, how will you monitor that they are actually recovering? So it has a deep-rooted impact in terms of we are looking at discovering certain attributes which we traditionally call as biomarkers, and these are to be discovered on actual tests which are being done. And there is a plethora of tests. Hello. So I think I was disconnected in the middle. Can you confirm if? Hello. Am I audible to you?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay. So some technical glitch, I was disconnected. The Zoom app stopped working in Dream, but now it's okay. I think it will not disconnect me. Okay. So essentially, what we were trying to do at that point of time was to come up with what would be the method of doing these initial tests, and on top of it, to find out essentially what do you look into a particular test, which we call as biomarkers. Now, ideally, we as people who delve a lot into medical image analysis, we had a vision something like this, that given that there is a person who is feeling shortness of breath and maybe suspicious of having a COVID like scenario or possibly COVID, they walk into a radiological scan center. You take an X-ray of this particular person, you get an X-ray image, you run it through some sort of an AI model. For our say, I mean, today most people would just do a blind relation of an AI model with a deep neural network. And I would also go with the same kind of a point. So maybe we just train a deep neural network and you have one of those deep neural networks available over here. And then out comes over there some sort of a natural language description of how otherwise a radiologist will describe what they are able to see in the image. So say in this case, this AI model essentially pops up this kind of a sentence which says there is a coarsening of lung markings more evident at the lower fields, but no clear consolidation seen. And then along with that, it essentially marks out a certain region where it did find out this kind of an observation. And this is what we call as an explainable diagnosis. So not just saying the final diagnosis, but also providing where to look into in order to do that. Now, this is what we wanted to build on the on the golden standard. And then we thought, okay, let's get started. I mean, we are image analysts. What's the big deal with it? there are so many X-rays which we are anyways getting down because patients are just getting scanned for X-rays, CTs, MRs, whatsoever for this COVID screening part of it. And radiologists are annotating, marking. A lot of people are just freely releasing it out. I mean, there would be tweets going around for some hundred or thousands of X-rays released out on GitHub or on a Google Drive, and you just needed to scheme out the internet and find out those images, and then you can build up your own repository with it. Now, there is a not just one challenge, but once we started deep diving into it in order to build up models, then we started looking and facing a lot of those challenges. So the first and foremost, what we want to do is we want to train the AI model. Now, when you want to do that, the first and foremost thing which one needs to look into is what kind of an imaging modality should my input be from. So what this means is essentially, should I be taking images of COVID patients from point of care ultrasound, or should I be taking it from chest X-rays, or should I be taking it from CTs? So this is the first thing which I need to really be able to address. Next is to look into labels. Now, when we look into labels, what essentially we wanted to say is that if we are looking at any of these images, then you have certain annotations on these images. What are you looking at? You have a certain set of features which we call as biomarkers. Now, the set of observations or features which we are looking at in these models, they keep on varying from modality to modality. So in ultrasound or point of care ultrasound, what you are essentially going to look at is very different from what you will be finding and looking at in case of a chest X-ray. That itself is going to be very different from what you're looking at in case of a CT. So these are challenges which still persist and they will be there. The next thing is to look into the number of samples. Now, fortunately, by the time we started working in this one, in end of February, more of like in early March of 2020, the world already had 1 million plus cases of confirmed COVID. Now that we had 1 million such cases of COVID, which was confirmed across the world, and actually most of them, or practically all of them, had actually been imaged with either a CT, X-ray, or MR. So you had lung images available very easily with you. So it was good. But the only problem is that less than 1% of these images were actually annotated using some sort of a common standard. So what we call as a reporting and data standard, or RADS, was practically absent in them. You do not have that available. Now, this is where the challenge becomes unsolvable. So you're sitting on tons of data. You have this data coming in from different demography, and you also have a confirmation whether they were COVID positive or not. The only thing is you are sitting on top of raw data, which is just images. You do not have annotations on them. You do not have labels associated with them. You do not have a risk scoring for them. And the reason why none of this is available is because there is no common standard. There is no template which is to be followed for doing this. And people are just still trying to evolve with that one. So this is where, though we are sitting on tons of patients and tons of raw data, we cannot make use of it in order to build any kind of an AI model. And that's a big challenge, which was proceeding forward from there. So that's where we started this particular initiative called as the COVID-19 Action Group on AI and Radiology. Now, what this action group had in mind was we were a group of physicians, radiologists, researchers, a lot of our PhDs and undergrad students who came together, along with, and then these people had a certain number of experience in different types of say technologies, including natural language processing, deep learning, medical image analysis, vision, graph based processing, knowledge discovery, and all of them together partnered up with a set of say standardization and professional agencies, which included the Radiological Society of North America, RSNA, as well as the Indian Radiological and Imaging Association. And uniquely, there was a very interesting pro bono initiative called as the POCUS Atlas, which was essentially building up these standards for point of care ultrasound. So we partnered with all of them, and we got down a set of generous inputs coming down from our hospital partners in India and in Spain, along with a very unique pro bono initiative in the EU, which was the COVID-19 EU challenge, who really partnered with us in order to come up with a point that this kind of a common standard gets developed, which is also something which was very useful for them, and so that they can run their own challenge itself. So we started with all of this, and then comes to the point like what we were trying to do. So the essential part is something like this. The problem statement is very straightforward. So say that I have a hospital, I have a particular city. I'm looking at one particular city, which has one hospital, and say it has a certain number of beds. As of now, it's not visible, but it's supposed to be 20 beds over here. Now, what I'm looking at is at the onset of COVID, how the situation was working out is something like this: that you get first patient who is confirmed and diagnosed with a COVID-like symptom, or is confirmed through an RT-PCR test that there is COVID guaranteed on that one. So you move this patient into the hospital. Great. So the number of cases reported that day is essentially one. And that's the caseload in the hospital. In the next day, you have another additional patient who is coming into the hospital. So the caseload of the hospital is now becoming two, because you have one patient from the first day and another patient who comes in the second day. But the number of new cases which got reported that day is also one. So you keep on getting this way, like every day there is one new patient who is getting diagnosed and they get moved into the hospital. So at the end of day 20, you would find out that the hospital beds are practically full. So you had 20 cases which you could handle in the hospital, and you have 20 patients who have been over there. Now, what we see is that on the 21st day, you have one patient who is moving in over there. Now, while there is one patient who is moving into the hospital on the 21st day, but the first patient is also getting discharged. So that's how we were seeing. So all the green ones are those patients who have recovered from COVID. So you would see that, say, around the 25th day, your hospital caseload is still full at 20, but you are being able to exit one recovered patient every day, and there is an addition of a new patient to that particular bed. So as a result of which, you would see that since your say since the number of cases which are reported per day is the same as the number of cases who are recovering per day, so essentially there is no burden on the healthcare system, and that's ideally what we always wanted to achieve. And eventually what would happen is that after that day, after the 25th day, you would see that there is a decline in the number of caseloads in the hospital. And that's typically when we say that there is a caseload decline and people are recovering. So the pandemic is going away, and we are okay to again move out. And then people start mingling out freely, and then they will again get affected. So that's the sad part of it in any way. Now, let's take another scenario where I have hospital B of a similar configuration. So there are just 20 beds present over there. We see that every day there is one patient who is getting affected and they are getting admitted. And this keeps on going till the 20th day, when you have the 20th new patient who comes down and the 20th bed of the hospital is also filled up. Interestingly, what happens is that, very contrary to the earlier scenario, where on the 21st day, you could cure the first patient and then he's moving out. And once the first patient is moving out, so in the first patient's place, you have another new patient who goes into the hospital. Now, here what happens is you don't have that condition over here. So on the 21st day, there is no cure. So now there is one patient, one person, or a confirmed case who is left untreated out over there. So the untreated case is still there in their house. They do not go to the hospital. On the next day, which is the 22nd day, because there is one untreated case out over there who is not put into a containment and not in the hospital, not under a treatment, they end up becoming something which we call as super spreaders. So they would start spreading out all of these viruses over over there, and then they tend to affect more number of people. Number of untreated but confirmed cases so it's not so hard to understand and anticipate over here, because you essentially see that there is a higher amount of people with the propensity to spend. System actually starts to collapse. So what we had seen in 2020, in the earlier parts of people just lying out on the roads in Italy and in US, was essentially of the fact that the healthcare system did not have enough of bandwidth to consume that many people who are getting affected over here. Now, if I really want to solve this problem, how do we go around? Now, there was definitely something which was being done very well by hospital A, which hospital B has not been able to figure out. The question is, how can this thing be solved? So one of the simple options which we can employ over here is that we able to come together on a common working group and then share their experiences in terms of like what was the nature of the patients they were getting, what was the kind of a treatment they were giving to these patients, and how were these patients recovering and functioning over there. So this is what is the information they need to share with each other in a working group. Now, when they come over there, interestingly, they see something like this, that I have in hospital A patients who are in the age group of 20 to 40 and in the weight category of 50 to 60. In case of hospital B, I have patients who have a very different age group, who are in the age group of 40 to 60, which is the next 20-year part over there. Now, also, the weight of the patients is between 60 to 80. Now, typically, if you look over here, then the nature of the patients is itself very different between the two hospitals. Now, it's not so unusual to appraise and undertake treatment which is being given to this different group of patients will also end up being different. And that's essentially what we see. So if there are three kinds of treatment, treatment A, treatment B, and treatment C, then we end up seeing the fact that in case of hospital A, treatment B works out very fine, whereas in case of hospital B, there is a higher success of treatment A working out. And this is because the incident, the nature of the patient group was itself very different in both the hospitals. So a solution to this may be that we try to find out an inverse model whereby looking into a statistical evidence. Essentially, you have a large cohort of collection of these success data, and from there you can do it. So technically, what I'm asking you to find out is this kind of a conditional probability. So what is the probability of a treatment being successful given that I know which group this patient comes from? Now, if I write down mathematically, then it's an equation which is written like this, that probability of the treatment outcome, this S, we also, I'm looking at probability of a treatment needs to make when trying on the probability of a symptom for a certain treatment multiplied by the probability of the treatment divided by the probability of the symptom. Now, if you look into this one, this is actually, it's just simple base theorem written down over here. So I have patients of two different age groups. One is between 20 to 40, another is 40 to 60. Another is the criteria of weight. They can be either in the weight group of 50 to 60 or weight group A. I observe all of my people, their treatment outcome looking like over here. And based on that, on the fourth day, I would like to make an assessment of how good is the treatment outcome going to be. So what I see is that on the fourth day, based on my observations on the first 3 days, I would see that all of my patients who turned up to me were in the age group of 20 to 40 and in the weight of 50 to 60. I did not have any patient of any other weight or age group over here. Now, on the fourth day, if I get a patient who comes in this particular block, so essentially that patient is of the age group of 20 to 40, but instead of the weight being between the range of 50 to 60 kilograms, now the weight of this patient is between 60 to 80 kilograms. Now what happens over here is that your P of S is that kind of a symptom could have existed. At least this hospital had never seen that kind of a patient. You would also see that your P of S given T is also 0. As a result of which, your P of T given S, which is the probability of the outcome of this treatment given a certain symptom, is essentially what we see over here. Efficiency criteria within trying whenever we are trying to evaluate a base theorem. Now, this is a data science problem. We can try to put into some sort of a statistical estimators in order to solve it. So let's see, if you just have one single point present, have a bunch of data based on which you can ever be able to observe. So let's look into, this is the practical scenario for symptoms, which are, I explained you with, they are essentially not symptoms, they are just some. For COVID, what would be a scenario? A person can be coughing or may not be coughing. The person may have fever or we can, and there can be all of these combinations. The person may have fever but is not coughing. And the person does not have fever and is not coughing at all. That may also be the scenario, though asymptomatic cases. Next is there can be a lot of pre-existing disorders, diabetes. So whether the person has both diabetes and hypertension or not, versus they don't have either of them or any of these intermediate spectrum. Here. Now, if I combine all of them, I get a space of my joint observation. Okay, so this is where we look into seeing that any kind of a data can now be converted into a very relevant information over here. Now, the point is, how do you really find all of these symptoms and all the different kind of therapeutic outcomes which need to be related over there? Now, this is not so hard to find it out. So what was done is very simple. We searched through a lot of medical literatures which was getting published around this time. So we had tons of them. There were these journals who were publishing out clinical reports, and each of these clinical reports was really valuable and worthy. The only problem which was here is that these clinical reports did not really have anything quantified into a tabular form. So we did not have these kind of exact variables being marked out which relate to being a tangible one. So there was plain text given over here, a bunch of images, some caption provided, and then we had to look through all of them, read and understand these things in order to work it out. Now, that's where all the knowledge lies, which needs to be now schemed in order for us to get some actionable insights. Now, where the challenge is on one side, there were a lot of contradictory findings which were getting reported. So there would be suddenly one paper which comes up and says, no, there is some contradiction with what otherwise is reported in the other journal articles. On top of it, in terms of what kind of images are we going in order to make this decision. So the developed world was looking at using CTs. The developing world was looking at using X-rays. The underdeveloped world was working in looking at using point of care ultrasound, because that's what's predominantly available. You don't just have everything available everywhere. So there was one challenge in terms of modality. There was definitely the other challenge in terms of creating this common paradigm of reporting, or the RADS, so that the data can be brought up in a common format itself. So in order to build this RADS, we came up with this idea that there should be a clickable sheet or a tick mark based system on a simple A4 sheet. And this needs to be divided into three group of observations, or three sets of how things are to be written. One is primary symptoms and patient info. So this will have the name, age, gender of the patient, the kind of modality on which you are doing, whether it's CTs, X-rays, or ultrasound. What is the kind of a view of the lungs which you are taking? How many days has it been since the symptom appeared for the patient first, and whether there is some follow-up being going on. Along with that, we also have an option of mentioning pre-existing conditions. These can be cardiac disorders like hypertensive disorder, or can be diabetes, or chronic kidney diseases, any of them as you need to have. Then there is a whole set of observations, which is a checklist, which comes of use. And finally, there is something which we call as a triaging. So the triaging is essentially a score, a risk score indicator. So based on looking at a certain number of features, so if you find a certain group of features, then you can say what is the risk factor associated with it. So that's the triaging which comes over here. Now, once you are able to create this enables you to essentially have a clickable set of symptoms. You click on that. Based on that, a clinician can actually fetch in a lot of previous case reports, and based on the success of a certain treatment reported in these case reports, they can now build up an evidence for delivery of medicine. Now, the question is, how do you really build up this sheet? Because it's not a very simple thing or an easy thing to do. So in order to do that, we thought of actually creating a platform which can serve as an enabler for this system. So the first part of the platform is to look into where do I get all the contributions of these cases coming in? So I will have annotations, cases, clinical reports, everything being fed onto a data port. This data port, you can imagine this to be something like a Google Drive, where people are just putting in things in with some sort of a categorical annotation, and then we are able to take in all of that and ingest into it. Next is to build up two things. One is to build up the RADS, or the reporting system, and also to build up the AI models over here. And then finally, we wanted to go out and educate the masses and the community based on the case reports and the RADs, and then to share these AI models and the white papers out over there. Now, in order to build this RADS, our idea was to start with a stratified intervention of AI. So look into low-level interventions, then move over to mid-level interventions, and then finally to high-level interventions. So when I say about low-level interventions, these are very simple techniques like search, sort, and or similarity retrieval. And the way we were doing it was on the data which was available on the internet. So essentially looking into simple implementations of web crawling, word tokenization, and keyword spotting in order to find out what is that important information which we need to pick up from here. Next, we wanted to do mid-level interventions, which was in terms of saliency, filtering, and voting aggregation. So, and what this had to do was to find out that there is a visually salient or important feature in that particular report or the text or the journal article which we are looking at. That there is that we also need to segment out important features from the image, or segment out the text which is present in those PDFs over there, and then we need to look into parsing and clustering. So I will come down to exactly like where they get introduced and used in the subsequent part of it. And finally, it was look into the high-level interventions, and this is where we were making use of machine learning and deep learning techniques, including convolutional neural networks and recurrent nets. And this was to come up with explainable diagnosis by looking directly at images. So, as an example, let's take this particular situation over here, where we need to build up this kind of a COVID-19 RADS. So, the idea is we wanted to build up this checklist. Then how do we start with doing that one? Because this checklist is supposed to reflect decision consensus of different people who are essentially reporting out on X-rays. So this at the start, we have some sort of technologies for web crawling, which whereby we feed in keywords onto a search engine, and from there we get access to a lot of articles. Now these articles can be from journals, they can come out in the way of PDFs, they can come out in the way of web pages, they can be text there can be plain text, there can be images, there can be combined media of these things which come out. Now once you get this one, the first and foremost is to do some sort of a content spotting. So contents are spotted in two different ways. One is we try to find out where is the radiological image, and then where is the caption associated with that particular image over there. These are two things which we need to spot out over there. Now, when we spot out these two things, next is on this text which is associated with it, the caption over there, we try to find out what are the common standard keywords from a radiological dictionary. So that's from a common data elements for radiology, where we find out and spot these common keywords, and also find out a bunch of those words which are not at all the keywords present over here. Now that passes through tokenization and parsing, from where we are able to find out that these are the commonly reported keywords. So they essentially mean certain features on an image, and that's the one which we need to point out. And then we also find out that some of them may be new, they were not even known earlier, and then we spot them. So we go together, aggregate all of them, and created the first version of the checklist over here. Now what we did is we sent out a bunch of images and a bunch of this checklist, along with collecting the triaging score. So what is the kind of a risk factor associated with a certain kind of a observation being seen, and then started doing another level of voting aggregation. So when we collected this score, we actually got radiologists to use this checklist and annotate on them. We looked into what is the consensus between the radiologist in annotating certain features and what was the score associated. If we found out a consistent pattern, which is a certain group of features and a certain risk score have a higher tendency of occurring. So this is essentially a pairwise voting which we are looking at. So whichever has a more correlated pair, we assign a higher score to them. And that score is some sort of a pseudo indicator of this posterior probability, which I'm trying to indicate over here. Now, based on that, we ended up coming with this kind of a score sheet, which we call as the reporting and data system for COVID-19, or RADS. Now, a whole AI-based technique exercise and 2 iterations of this is what took us roughly a month. So around end of March of 2020, we already had this sheet. And then this was based on something which we had engaged and started in the start of 2000 and in the around the first week of March 2020. Now, eventually, around in September of 2020, we did come to know that RSNA had also released out a similar kind of a RADS system, and that was as of then available only for the chest CT. But there was a one-on-one relationship between what we had found out and what was there present in the RSNA sheet as well. The only difference was that RSNA came to designing this sheet based on a whole set of human-based activities. So they got in working groups of radiologists and physicians working together, and based on their working together, it was found out like what are the consensus features which need to be essentially reported out over here. So the primary thing which I would definitely say is that it needs a lot of efforts, and instead of humans and AI competing against each other, it always makes sense that they collaborate together and work out in order to solve this one. Now, finally, what I have to say is that it took us nearly 40,000 years to come out of our caves or caveman kind of a dwelling to a very civilized society and an open society where we are not afraid of the dark and we are not afraid of going out in open air. And it just took us 3 months of COVID-19, which pushed us back from open air, easily mingling spaces into again caves, because we were really worried of coming out over there. Now, the way this can be worked out is definitely by getting actionable insights from knowledge. And this is where, in order to get actionable insights, we really need to look into the symbiosis of humans and AI working together in order to fight it. We have one use case of what we did around the time of COVID-19. There are several more of such stories around in the world which can be told, and we should definitely look into how this can work synergistically together for enhancing how healthcare and medicine can be delivered in the future. So that's where I would close for the day, and I am open to taking up questions and in general to this topic, or if you have anything with medical imaging and deep learning, I would definitely love to answer them as well. Hey, everyone, I see your hands up. Oh, okay.
Hello. Hi, Debdoot. Thank you very much for this wonderful talk and accepting our invitation to come and deliver this keynote, this wonderful speech. I have a question, Debdoot, for you. Thank you very much for presenting this. Now, you said you developed this RADS around by March 2020. Now, by that time, there was only very, the number of cases was very limited compared to what we have today. So have you changed it since then, or is it just what you have originally developed?
No, so what we have published is the version 2. There has been an update subsequent to that one by version 3. We haven't released version 3 because version 3 is currently under clinical trial. So there is a large scale trial which we are doing with 3 hospitals over here who are collecting data based on the version 3 of the RADS protocol. And version 3 has another interesting thing. It essentially links between modalities. So a certain observation which you see on CT will be related to a certain other observation which you see on X-ray. So that relationship is what we are working out on version 3, which is an interesting one, but it's very complicated to verify actually. So the validation is still ongoing, and maybe around in early of next year, we will be able to release version 3 as well.
Okay, thank you, Debdoot. And to follow up, have you used the data collected using that to verify your system?
Yes, so I did not speak about that, but we actually have a whole data collected and put up on IEEE data port. It is called as the COVID-19 CXR dataset. So it's a collection of chest X-rays from taken. So some of these chest X-rays are the ones which we acquired from our hospital partners, and a lot of them are counted data taken from open source datasets. What we have done is that all of those images, so it's close to a million plus X-ray images of COVID and non-COVID cases, and all the cases which have a bearing similarity with what appears on the X-ray of COVID, and each of them are annotated following down a common protocol which is established according to the COVID-19 RADS sheet which we built up.
Okay, thank you very much, Debdoot.
So if you want to know more, you can actually go on this website for our COVID-19 action group. And there are these contributions which are listed out over there. So on this particular GitHub page, you will be able to see all the links to the other contributions as well as the dataset. So the dataset is hosted on IEEE data port to manage and mitigate out the license issues as well. And a lot of people are using it. There are subsequent publications which we get to know about it. We just haven't updated, but we are trying to update that and create a good repository whereby people can also cross-serve and figure out how interesting ways they can use it further.
Sure. Thanks, Debdoot. I think I'm pretty sure some of our colleagues will access those and use them, and probably they can collaborate with you guys to do some good research.
Yeah, surely. I look forward to it.
Participants, do you have any other questions? If you have, you can ask in the chat box as well. So it seems like nobody have any questions. And I would like to sincerely thank you on behalf of today's attendees for the informative and timely presentation, as well as for the discussion. And I'm pretty sure it was an eye-opener for all of us on how much impact AI have on the modern healthcare system as well. And in addition to that, I would like to express our humble gratitude as the organizing committee of ICIIS 2021 for accepting our invitation and for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.